Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 167. I sat down with Paul Koudounaris. Now, some of you may recognize his name, many of you may not, but I would gather that you have probably seen his photography and just didn't know it. Paul is a photographer, as I mentioned, an author, and an art historian. He is a member of the Order of the Good Death, and this conversation took place in his insanely cool house. It's more like a giant art installation, and in fact, it's such a sight to behold that I want you all, that's all of you that are listening, to go to Facebook's, the Hey Human page on Facebook. It's under facebook.com/HeyHumanPodcast, where you can see images that I took the day of this interview and see video of his house and of Paul himself. Wow, what an adventure that was. I've never seen anything like it. Giant heads of animals and bodies of animals, taxidermy, and paintings and religious artifacts and puppets. Oh my gosh, just so many wild and wonderful and bizarre things. Paul himself, wild, wonderful, and bizarre. He invited me into his home, and that was very kind. And since the taping of this, which was last week, he has dismantled everything. On Sunday, while I was at Comic-Con, which is a whole other story. Wow, that was crazy. Paul invited all his friends in, and everyone got to take something or a few things from the house. So he took apart the installation, dismantled his home, as it were, which I think was probably quite a sight to behold in and of itself. He said the whole thing took about 2 hours. I'm sure building that place out took many, many years. I've included in the pictures of the outside as well of the house, because that's really cool to see. It was a super hot day, and we sat on the floor and chatted, and you'll hear airplanes going by. I think a couple helicopters went by as well. And then at the very end, our mutual friend, Ruth Waits, who has been on Hey Human Podcast, and she's episode 72. That was from October 31st, 2017, which is very fitting when you hear the episode. So I just wanted to let you know about the airplanes, so you'll hear that. And then at the very end, when he was telling me about some of the artwork in the house, he kind of leaned back, and because the artwork is, many of the pieces are attached to the ceiling, so he was leaning back and talking. So it's a little more difficult to hear him, but I think, and it's probably okay. When I listened back, I was able to hear stuff. So remember, go to Hey Human Podcast on Facebook to check out the videos and photos. And you definitely want to do that. It's pretty cool. We had this really interesting conversation. Death as a commodity is fascinating to me. And we talked about that. And the fear of death, especially, is certainly a huge commodity. The stay young forever vibe is going strong. So anyway, it was a really fascinating conversation for me, and hopefully for you as well. Usual stuff, heyhumanpodcast.com. Tons of links on the links page for this episode. I know I say that every time, but for sure this one, including Paul's books. They're all there, so they're easy to find on that links page. Amazon portal on the front page of the Hey Human Podcast website. If you shop Amazon, please do so through that portal, and it helps support Hey Human, helps keep it ad-free. Susan at heyhumanpodcast.com if you want to reach out to me. SusanRuth.com if you want to check out the other stuff I do. And then, of course, social media, as I mentioned, Facebook. I've also got Instagram under Hey Human Podcast. And if you want to check out my personal social medias, they're all under Susan Ruthism, SusanRuthism. And of course, please rate and review Hey Human podcast on iTunes. You listen to the show, please take a moment, go on iTunes, give it a rating, give it a review. It's humongously helpful, and I really appreciate it. Okay, without further ado, let's get into this. I'm excited. Here we go. Paul Koudounaris.
Yes.
Hi. Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Hey Human.
Thank you for having me.
We are here in your extraordinary home in Los Angeles.
It'll be my home for one more day.
And you're dismantling it.
Dismantling it, yeah.
And your house is famous, if not infamous.
So I am told. For those who are listening online, I guess, and don't have never seen it or aren't seeing it, it's kind of like if Hieronymus Bosch did a painting for Rudyard Kipling, maybe.
And threw in some Escher on the side. There's
a large amount of taxidermy and a large amount of mannequins and paintings coming down from the ceiling and some other random stuff.
The dolls are really something. This wow, life-size.
That is not a doll. That's a life-size marionette from the Burmese National Puppet Theater.
Oh, wow. How did you acquire that?
I brought her back from Asia in a suitcase. I was calling her my wife jokingly as we traveled. She was all packed in a bag.
I'm sure the TSA loved that.
They didn't care. That's not what they're looking for.
Right. If she had been stuffed with heroin, that would have been a whole other story. I want to start... your Ruth, my friend Ruth, yes. And your friend Ruth introduced me to you, and she said, you have to check out these pictures on Instagram. So I went and I said, okay, yes, I'm in. Who is this person? And then, of course, I looked you up and saw that you are many things: photographer, author, a curiosity toward death and all the things of ritual. And
well, I've written 3 books on the topic of different cultural approaches to death. I wrote 1 book about the history of charnel houses being church bone rooms. I wrote a second book about I had kind of rediscovered, because I have a PhD in art history, I've done a lot of art history and archaeological work, and I had kind of rediscovered a body of Baroque-era jeweled skeletons, really, really beautiful, that had just been overlooked and kind of hidden in the closet, literally. A lot of them were just hidden away because the Catholic Church was kind of embarrassed about how beautifully macabre they were and how they just didn't fit modern standards anymore. And then I wrote a more global book called Memento Mori that just kind of detailed my travelings across the globe and visiting and participating in a lot of death-related rituals.
How old were you when you first thought about death? Contemplated your own?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I was in elementary school, and I specifically remember it. We were playing kickball, and in the middle of this kickball thing, I was like the batter. It's not a batter in kickball. What is it? The kicker, I guess. And they rolled me the ball, and I kind of got paralyzed, and I couldn't kick it. And I just started thinking about what I wanted on my gravestone and how I wouldn't be around to see it. And I started crying. Not really with sadness, but confusion, because I just didn't really understand what it meant. And the teacher came to me and she said, what's wrong? And I just didn't know if this is such a Western attitude. Even at such a young age, we don't really realize how ingrained this stigma about death is. I didn't feel I could tell her. So I told her it was because my pet rabbit had run away, and I was crying, and she took me to the office, and they called my mother. I was like, oh, your son's really upset. He's crying because his pet rabbit ran away. And she's like, well, that was 2 years ago. I didn't know he was still sad about it. Maybe we should get him another rabbit. And I never really explained to anyone what had happened. But just that in itself is telling, because like I said, we have such a stigma about death, and it's something that, one of the trendy words for it is death positive, not to look at death as something that's, oh boy, how fun it's going to be, but, just to reclaim a more positive attitude towards it as a natural process. And it's something that I would later kind of reappeared throughout my life. You know, when I was in grad school working towards my PhD, I was kind of like maybe the Fox Mulder of the art history department at UCLA. I was always working on these weird macabre things, and a lot of them had to do with death or cannibalism or, you know, some kind of postmortem thing or the afterlife. And then when I got out of grad school, I just started working on that stuff full time and writing about it.
I'm actually surprised that there's not more cannibalism known in the U.S. That, for all seriousness, that surprises me. I thought for sure when I did a little research on cannibalism a little while back, because I used to joke when people say, "Oh, you eat animals," I said, "Yeah, but I mean, I'd eat humans too if I had to.
If you had to, you probably would, and most people probably would.
They would never admit it, though.
Well, that I don't know. There are very few. This is something that I've studied. There are very few universal taboos. If you want to get into universal archetypes and taboos, there are very few. Cannibalism is one of them. Incest is another of them. It's like you can go pretty much anywhere, and to perform incest, you're really considered a bad person. And the same thing with cannibalism.
Yeah, I would eat a person before I'd have sex with my brother, for sure.
Well, yeah, depends on who you're eating and who your brother is, right?
Yeah,
all right.
That's true.
There are, in world history, there are a couple of societies who have performed cannibalism, but on a symbolic level, like as part of a ritual.
You mean like Catholics and Christians who take the Eucharist?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that too, because alterity, just constructing the outsider group as the other. Cannibalism has always historically been something they have been accused of. When the Europeans first come to the Americas, oh my God, they're cannibals. Whether they had any indication that they were actually eating human flesh or not, they'd come back to Europe and say they're cannibals, because it casts them as the other, it casts them as unsalvageable, and it aids in this discourse of domination. We have to dominate them because they're subhuman, because they're cannibals. And this has been going on. This has been going on since, classical days. I mean, the outsider was always a cannibal. The outsider always looked like a monster.
Cartoons, all the cartoons that depict the Africans as cannibals, they always throw the person in the pot and cook it up. And
absolutely. And in the great religious wars, that was another big form of propaganda, especially for the Protestants, because it was very easy. It's like, wait, what are you guys saying? You're saying that Christ's flesh literally, that this wafer literally becomes flesh? Doesn't this make you a cannibal? And it was a way of disparaging Catholicism as something that was irredeemable, that something really, really could not be considered a true faith for a human being because it had violated a taboo. And the Catholics, be damned, they insisted on transubstantiation being real, so it was very easy to throw that accusation at them.
It's interesting to me that a lot of sci-fi, it is a great honor to be eaten. The cannibalistic of grokking, or there's a lot of eating of people as a way of honoring them, or showing your admiration, or to get their knowledge, or that kind of thing.
Well, it's a kind of form of sacrifice or martyrdom. You self-martyrdom or something for the good of the cause, to give of yourself to everyone else. For everything that's negative, there's always a flip side. There's always an ideal that can be found of it. And for everything that's positive, you can always find a negative side of it too.
Sure. That's the yin and the yang of it, right?
Yeah, it is.
So you are a child contemplating your own death.
Yes.
Did you decide what was going on that gravestone? And has it changed?
Look around and I'll tell you. I wanted them to put he liked animals.
We are surrounded by animals.
Animals, yeah.
Parts of them.
Well, this has been a problem for me, and one of the reasons that I'm getting rid of all this taxidermy, I mean, aside from the fact that spiritually I've just outgrown the collection and I've outgrown the site, is that when I first started picking these up, because most of these have been with me for 15 years at least, I started picking them up before the whole oddities craze became popular. Back when nobody wanted them, and I specifically remember the first one I ever found, I had some neighbors who used to sell at the flea market. And they came home one day from the flea market, and in the box with their discards and stuff they couldn't sell was this old tattered goat's head. And I remember I walked outside and it was night and it was dark, and I looked at him and I just felt this incredible sadness. I was like, Christ, someone killed you, threw you away. Now they're trying to sell you, and now they failed to sell you, and now they're throwing you away, and that is so absolutely tragic and wrong. And I kind of said to myself, it's like, I got to do something. What can I do for him? And I went in and I knocked on the neighbor's door. I was like, are you getting rid of him? That's from the flea market? They're like, yeah, you want it? I was like, what do you want for it? They're like, $20. I was like, fine, I'm going to get you $20. I had them $20, and I took him inside, and I spent the next couple of days perfectly restoring him absolutely beautiful. So he was, obviously wasn't alive, but he looked absolutely fantastic. And I started picking them up after that for the same reason, just because they had been discarded, and it filled me with this kind of horror, that someone could kill and then disrespect the remains. And so I started adopting them almost like I was adopting a new pet or taking in a stray, and I would always fix them up and try to make them beautiful again. And in the end, the reason I started decorating with them, because it's like, obviously, to say that, oh, he's got a lot of taxidermy, for most people, in most people's context, it means it's a bunch of trophy heads nailed to the wall. That's not what's happening here. None of them are displayed as trophy heads. In a way, it's more like an art installation in which I live, and creating that kind of environment with them was a way for me of taking something that was dead but creating something that seemed organic, I couldn't give them new life, but I gave them a new purpose. Rather than sitting around representing something dead, surrounding myself with them in this fanciful way, and decorating with them in these strange and unexpected ways to create a totality of an environment in which each of them was an essential part.
How old were you when you began this practice?
In my 20s.
I find it really interesting because the idea of ritualizing death as an honor, that you began that work at without even realizing you were beginning the work.
Yeah, well, again, it was something that it's always been there in my mind ever since I was 6, I guess, wasn't it? It's like I love animals, and I've got this thing about death. So I guess, and I guess when you run it back from here and you've written 3 books about the topic and so forth, you realize this has always been there in you. These interests have always coincided. But at the same time now, it's like these were all important to me at one time. Like I said, I've changed as a person, but also my outlook has changed because these are no longer discards. These are things that people want. And when I say I'm moving, people instantly start asking, how much do you want for the lion? How much do you want for the Koudounaris? How much do you want for the bicycle? None of them are for sale. I'm giving them all away. I'm giving them all to good homes because I don't want to see them become commodities, And also, I've always known this, that it would be that taking them in, as I felt I was as strays, I've always known that it would be very different if I was directly confronted with the killing process. Because in California, we're not, If you live in Wisconsin or something, you're going to see guys driving around with dead deer on the back of their truck, and you're going to hear gunshots maybe out in the woods, and you're a lot more confronted with the killing process than we are. California is not a big hunting state. We all know they died, and we all know they were shot, but we see the end result, after they've been prepared, which looks beautiful, and we see pictures of them, the living animals, not these particular ones, but the living animals, and they look beautiful, and we kind of willingly forget that middle stage, that they were shot, they were essentially raped of their skins, they were torn apart, and then they were stuffed. And one thing that social media has done is it has confronted us a lot more with the killing process. Like, you can go on Instagram and you can look up certain accounts that are hunters, and you'll see these, like, there's one account that's this like hot blonde girl with the big breasts, and she's got this big rifle, and she shoots things, and she just, she sits there on her pages smiling with this dead ram in front of her. And every time I see that, I walk in here where I've got these dead things, and I feel like crying or throwing up, because it's like, God, someone did that to you. Someone treated you like that, And so it's like becoming more confronted with the killing process has also made it a lot more difficult for me to be around these heads, even though I know that I approached acquiring them with very good intentions.
So you've made an arc.
Kind of, yeah.
Do you feel you will mourn the loss of anything in here when you let it go, or have you?
Well, I'm not getting rid of everything. There are some things that I still feel connected to that I will keep. again, it's hard for the listener who can't see the place, but I'm keeping this vast, bizarre collection of paintings for sure. I'm keeping the taxidermy goats. I feel a connection to them because the whole thing started with the goats. I'm keeping this 120-year-old taxidermy Victorian dog because this one just feels like, you look at that dog and you know this was someone's little princess, and that's the way I've styled her, with a little crown, you know, and a little amulet and her own little throne thing. And
it's stunning how alive she feels, even though I know she's not. There's a lot of
there's
character.
Something about her, it feels like a little princess.
Very regal.
Keep her, So some of this stuff I'm going to keep. I'm not getting rid of all of it. It just depends on what I still feel connected to in some way.
Why do you think Americans are so terrified of their own mortality? Everybody knows we die.
Yeah.
And we tempt fate and we tempt death constantly with alcohol and drugs and cigarettes and
now more than ever, you know, it's like the people, I mean, the people who fall off a cliff trying to take a selfie, you know.
But that's an accidental death. I'm talking people that are actively doing things that they know will kill them, and yet there is this disconnect about death. People are terrified of death.
I think I've always thought that it's not just America. It's what we'd call Western culture in general. I've always thought it actually had something to do with capitalism. And let me explain. We live in a growth-oriented society, and we have a growth-oriented economic model. Everything is about the future and about pushing forward, and there's nothing that anchors you to the past like being surrounded by death. Because, you know, it's like, trust me, I'm a guy who's done more photographs of corpses than anyone in the world, for sure. And there's a feeling I always have when I'm standing there alone in this chamber full of mummies or this room full of skulls, and it's like time collapses on you, you know, because you're standing in the present, you're looking at the past, but you're contemplating your own future. So it's a timeless sensation. And I think, and this is not just me who says this, actually, it's like Baudrillard talked about this too, and he said that we had to sever our connection to death. We had to cut that cord in order to be as future-oriented as we wanted to be. We had to sever that anchor because it was going to keep us caught in the past. And so I think he's right. I believe that. I think it has something to do with that. There's a lot more to it as well. Obviously, there are a lot of factors. There's never one single factor in something that's this vast. There was something that happened in the early 19th century that was also vitally important in changing our relationship with death, which was the growing understanding of disease. You know, because the dead used to be just buried anywhere. You know, they would bury them in the, you know, the
and they'd leave them out, right? They'd be like, Grandma's in the kitchen hanging out. She's dead.
You know, but they buried them in the cemeterium, which was the churchyard, you know, and then when that was filled, they would just bury more, and they would just, and eventually you had cities like Paris where around the Cemetery of the Innocents, the soil was so permeated with human goo, and the soil had been so exhausted that the corpses could no longer decompose, so they were turning to this goo, and people's houses were just kind of sinking into this human goo in some neighborhoods. And there was this growing understanding of the spreading of disease, and so the dead became a contaminant, and in some ways unfairly so. I spent a lot of time with mummies who are extremely old, and you're not going to get a disease from them. After a certain time, the body is no longer contagious for anything. It's essentially just an old shoe. It's just a leather object, you know, but you know, when they became potential contaminants, when they became physical pollutants, I think they also became psychological pollutants as well. So like I said, you can come up with any number of reasons why. Also, around World War I in particular, and this is something that Freud wrote about, that he's the one who coined the term the denial of death. And he wrote it in particular about the wars in the early part of the 20th century and the stigma they had on human psychology. So it's something that it's very new. It's actually, in terms of human history, very abnormal to ghettoize the dead and push them away the way we have. It's very new, and to answer your question, there's any multitude of reasons why it took over in Western society. It's funny, though, because There is, for instance, we have such hubris in Western culture that we just naturally assume that whatever we do and however we think is the correct way. And we don't realize how aberrant we are when it comes to the way we treat the dead. There's this festival that I was at a few years back in Indonesia. It goes on in certain villages every year. Every village doesn't do it at the same time, but you may have heard of it. It's called the Menene Festival, and it's in Tanah Toraja on Sulawesi. And that's when they take the mummies out of the tombs, because they mummify their relatives, and they take them out of the tombs, and they dress them up, and they talk to them, and they walk them around the village. And I've been to that, and I photographed it. And you know, now it's a little bit known. The first time I went, it wasn't known at all. And the pictures that I took wound up going on all these websites with these stories like zombies in Indonesia or something, and all these horror stories, and people saying all these weird things. And oh, it's my God, it's so sick. They're absolutely sick people, without realizing that, you know, up into the early 20th century, in some parts of Italy, for instance, it was still typical to mummify your parents and put them on display in the church crypt. For instance, Palermo, the largest in situ collection of mummies anywhere in the world is in Palermo, Sicily. It's not in South America. It's not in Egypt. It's in Palermo, Sicily, which we would consider the good civilized West. You know, they have the largest in situ collection of mummies anywhere in Palermo in those catacombs. And up until the 20th century, people were still mummifying their relatives and putting them on display, and they were coming down on November 2nd, the Day of the Dead, and they were coming down and they were redressing their relatives in new clothes,
bejeweling them and everything,
talking to them and telling them family news. And this is, you know, this is only a century ago. And, you know, nowadays this is considered like, you know, they're doing this in Indonesia, and people on my Instagram feed or online will say, this is a sign of mental illness. 100 years ago in Italy, it was a sign of a loving son.
Isn't that interesting? It
is interesting. We don't realize how queer our relationship with the dead actually is. Because cross-culturally and historically, it's the other way. It's not this ghettoization.
How do you want to be dealt with upon your death?
You know, and I honestly don't care. And I've been asked that question a lot, and I always think I should lie and come up with some really fancy answer. Because I got into studying the dead not because I had a particular agenda, just out of curiosity. It doesn't mean that I believe any of these ways are right. You know, right is only what meets the needs of a culture. That's right. You know, it's right to do what they do in Tanah Toraja and take the mummies around. It would be wrong to do that in London. It would be wrong because it would cause a panic. So right is whatever fits the needs of a culture in the most healthy way. I would say, and I've always said this and I mean it, I think it should be up to a vote of my friends. And just like, hey, you know, here's a form. You know, do you guys want to mummify me? Do you want to boil my skeleton and put me on a taxidermy lion? What do you want to do? You guys go ahead and choose, because I really don't care. Because in the end, the way we treat the dead is about the living. It's not about the dead at all. You know, there are all these, across the United States, there are all these museums, and many of them consider themselves to be death positive, and they're anatomy museums, and they you know, they have classes, but none of them will let you take a photograph because the dead don't want to be photographed. Oh my God, you know, I've been around a lot of dead people. They don't care. It's all for the living, you know. So I would say let my friends decide. Have you ever been afraid around death? Whether it's personal or this in your studies? No, I was run over by a truck once, and I was plenty afraid about that. But, you know, you're afraid when your own mortality is challenged, but afraid of the dead? No, never. They're not going to hurt you. I think that that our current fascination with zombies and horror films and all this stuff in Western culture, it actually comes because we've lost a meaningful contact with the dead. Because I think humans throughout history have always had that. You know, the Egyptians believed in the Ka, that the soul would return and they could talk to it. And the Romans had the parentalia, you know, which was, you know, like a, you know, feast of the ancestors, and they would take out all the ancestor busts and have a dinner. And we don't do stuff like that anymore. But I think just somehow intuitively, as human beings, we all feel we really desire a contact with the dead. We really desire a contact with those people who have passed on. And we've been so deprived of it in Western culture that I think it's manifested itself in these kind of unhealthy ways. You know, this weird fixation with zombies and horror films, and this idea that the dead are coming back to hurt us because we've lost all context for them just being our friends.
Well, I think because many of us are out of touch with our own God self.
Yeah.
That we take the divine out of the everyday things.
We take the divine out of it. You are so right about that. And it's funny because I was just having a conversation about this with someone who was, giving me the standard line. It's like, well, like science and religion are on two opposite spectrums, like they're enemies. And that is so untrue. If you look at the great scientists across history, they were all actually profoundly spiritual men. Believing in science has nothing to do with disbelieving in God or any kind of spiritual system. And do you know the epitaph that Alexander Pope wrote for Isaac Newton? Closer to God may no man go. So Newton wasn't challenging God in his work, according to the English of the day. He was showing us that the universe is so incredibly complex and so incredibly perfect, there has to be a God, because how could something this perfect happen by accident? So, but you're right, we've taken the divine out of everything.
I want to talk about the ritual of death, both of going into death and then coming out the other side. Is there any particular culture that really captivated you with their process? It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question. It's also a question, and I don't mean this answer to bow out of the question. I'm just it's just the truth. It's not really my area, which sounds so corny. The thing is that I had to draw a line somewhere in what I'm studying, or it will never stop. You know what I mean? It's like, because ultimately what I was doing was writing books about things. And, it's like when I was doing the Charnel House book, people would ask me these questions that are, ostensibly kind of ridiculous. Like, hey, are you going to include, like, Jeffrey Dahmer's art with bones? And it's like, no. Because it's like what I was doing in particular was studying in these books the way the dead were displayed for the benefit of the living and what the living got out of the display of the dead. So, of course, I would have to study what was involved spiritually, but my real interest was in the way the dead were displayed, either their bones or their bodies or something like that. So that was my real area.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, though, because serial killers ritualize their dead in a lot of ways. I mean, didn't Ed Gein make shoes or something out of the skin?
Whoa, Ed Gein was a really ambitious guy. I mean, he was making an entire suit. But that was not...
The listeners just went, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, Ed was a bad guy. But I'm talking about, in particular, not unique and eccentric and what society would consider perverse belief system held by a single individual out of an antisocial impulse. I'm talking about something that unifies society as a whole, that it's like, okay, it's like we had this room completely filled with mummies underneath the church at one time, and the reason we had it was because society could participate in this dialogue with the people who had passed on. So I'm not talking about that kind of thing like an Ed Gein type of guy, and you're right, I mean, it is a ritual for him. It's not a defined religion, but I suppose it takes the place of that for him. But that was never the kind of thing that I was studying. It was something that unified society in let's call it a positive way.
Yeah, on the book, there's some research where you talked about going to Italy and did you spend time, do you speak the language? Were you able to ask people, hey, what are you feeling about taking your ancestors out and bejeweling them and putting them in clothes?
Well, they're not doing it anymore.
I thought there still was some of that going on.
Not in Italy. In Italy. In Indonesia.
Okay.
There is a very vibrant kind of subculture involving skulls where they live in the house and are protective in Bolivia. Every November, I've been in Bolivia every November 8th for the last 12 or 13 years for this festival called Fiesta de las Nietitas, where the people who live in Nietita in Aymara is it's kind of a nickname for a skull. It means like the little pug-nosed one. And people will have some skulls in their house, and not necessarily even of relatives. It might be, just one they found or they bought or they got from a med school, but they feel that they've connected with the spirit of that skull, and it becomes like a family member. And every November 8th, those people will take the skulls back to the cemetery, and they'll dress them up and decorate them for this gigantic party. There's a ritual for one tribe in Madagascar where once a year they take the last dead relative out of the grave. They wrap them up in this white shroud, and they will all dance. All the family members will dance with them. And sometimes they'll even take the corpse wrapped in the shroud. They'll take it home for a meal, and they'll set it at the head of the table. And it's for the kids, because it's a way of saying to the kids, it's like, that guy there is the one who connects all of us sitting, like for every one of us sitting here at the table, that guy connects us to dozens of generations more like us who once sat at this table. And it's a way of introducing the children into family history. So this stuff still goes on in the world. It certainly doesn't go on in a place like Italy anymore.
Or America.
Well, no.
The neighbors would talk.
Well, we make, I've already made an unfair generalization by just referring to Western culture in general. There's some places that I've been where it's actually, the stigma's even greater. I did, my first photography show that I ever did was outside of the United States. My first photography show outside of the USA was in Sweden. And it was this woman who runs a gallery had set it up in this old medieval church that she had rented out for this show, and there were performances and so forth, and my photos lining the wall. Really beautiful place. And she said, I set up an interview for you with the local newspaper, but I have to tell you, they're not that, people in Sweden are not that keen on this kind of stuff. I just have to warn you before the reporter comes. I was like, well, I don't know, so far everybody seems really great. She's like, yeah, that's because you're dealing with us. You're not dealing with society at large yet. And I didn't. I was like, well, whatever, I'm sure it's fine. And then the newspaper reporter comes in, and I sit down at the table with the newspaper reporter, and her first question to me, her very first question was, is it okay for people to look at pictures like yours? I was like, what? That took me to a level that even in America I've never had to deal with. Like, is it okay to even look at the pictures? So there are some places where the stigma is really great. America and Los Angeles is a little bit, like Los Angeles is kind of an aberration in America, actually. Los Angeles, of every major city in America, Los Angeles is probably the most death positive. Just because we have such an influx of immigrants.
In Latin communities.
Not just Latin communities, also from Asia, where they've never had, a lot of places, I've traveled a lot in Asia, and in a lot of places in Asia, there's a real interest and a real belief in ghosts, for instance. And so the influx of people from Asia and India have created an environment that's, I think, in Los Angeles, a lot more open to talking about death and to being a little bit more positive about it rather than just shutting it off and ghettoizing it. And this is kind of new in LA since we've absorbed all this immigration. If you go back to Forest Lawn, Forest Lawn in Glendale, take a look at the old part of Forest Lawn, and there's a monument that really sums things up. You'll be looking out, it's kind of on that flat area that's down below, and you'll be looking out over this lawn, this grass-covered lawn with all the headstones set in. So if you stand back at the correct angle, you can't even see the headstones, you only see grass, right? And then you'll see this obelisk rising up. It's the only thing you can see in the field, this obelisk rising up. And there's a title on that obelisk, and it says Slumberland. So it's like the stigma at one time was so great that we couldn't even admit they were dead. They're only sleeping. They're just sleeping, and that's all.
Or the dog has gone to live on a farm, or, all that kind of thing. You bring up ghosts, which I'm glad, because part of your work, I saw it said sex ghosts?
Yeah.
What is this?
Well, yeah, it was something that I started studying out of personal interest because the stories are fascinating. In a way, it's come back to, pardon the pun, haunt me a little bit because I keep getting asked about it a lot. I've done a lot of lectures on this topic, and I coined that term sex ghost just because there was no other term that I could come up with for it. Just erotic ghost stories, hauntings that had a sexual or erotic overtone to them, which it turns out there's really a lot of them. A lot, and a lot of very famous and prominent people have reported instances of some kind of haunting which was sexual in nature. It's just they never get talked about because our stigma with death in this culture is such that it's bad enough to tell someone you've seen a ghost because they're going to think you're a crackpot, then tell them you've had sex with a ghost and they're really going to think you need to be locked away. But it's something that's been going on throughout history. To be honest, if you look at a lot of ancient mythology, you're going to find what I would call an erotic haunting story. For instance, think of the story of Zeus and Danae. Okay, so Danae is locked in this tower by her father. He doesn't want her to be touched by any man, but Zeus is really hot for her. So what does Zeus do? He turns himself into this golden mystical cloud. And this golden mystical cloud permeates her chamber and takes shape before her and has sex with her in this shower of gold. This is the original golden shower, and it's what we would consider a ghost story. Now, back in those days, they just considered it not a haunting, they considered it the acts of a god. There's another one in Greek mythology about a guy who is on the other side of the country, and he comes home one night and he makes mad love and passionate love to his wife, and then she wakes up the next day to find that he's never come back. He's still on the other side of the country, you know. But we would consider this a haunting. They just considered it an act of the gods. Think about the ecstasy of Saint Teresa. That's as much of an erotic ghost story as I've ever heard. It's just, well, you know, she's a really, really prominent Catholic nun who's receiving the gospel, what she claims is the gospel, by this glowing form of an angel who appears before her and penetrates her innards with a flaming rod that causes pain that is so sweet she does not wish for it to stop. It's the most orgasmic vision that I've ever heard, but you know, they just call it inspiration from an angel. They're not going to accuse her of having sex with a ghost. So it's something that's been going on throughout history, and when I've done lectures on this, I've brought up this entire history of it, and then I've proceeded to more modern versions of these kinds of sexualized ghost stories. I found a lot of them when I was working in Sicily. Sicily is a place where the veil between the living and the dead was real paper thin at one point in time, you know, because that was the last place that he was even having the mummies around. And there are a lot of ghost stories from there, and a lot of them are very sexual in nature.
I need to get me a sex ghost.
Get one, you know?
Get me a sex ghost. I saw there was some woman that was on one of the talk shows about, this was recently, last year, saying that she was having an affair with a ghost and that they were going to get married, and you know, she of course was laughed about. But I thought, well, you never know. I mean, what the hell?
I mean, it's problematic because I use the term ghost out of convenience for other people. I don't know what it is. I don't know that. I don't know what. I'll say this. I believe in the phenomena. I don't necessarily believe in the interpretation of it. That is the spirit of a particular dead person that we once knew that has returned.
Do you believe in the soul?
Not in a standard Christian sense.
In what sense then?
I believe in a kind of animus, like a life force that inhabits us that's connected to greater things.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. Tell me about the demon cats.
Well, I do. I have done a lot of lectures and studies on the history of felines. My cat herself is writing a book. My next book is really my cat's first book. I've helped her a little writing it. Sure. Yeah, someone had.
Sex ghostwriter.
She, cats aren't really allowed in the research library, so I had to help her out a little bit. But I've done a lot of study in feline history. And
the Egyptians.
The Egyptians, of course, but there was a time, when cats were not liked, and this is a big part of the book. The greatest genocide, if you can apply that term to animals, the greatest genocide in history towards animals was against cats in Europe, because they were considered, because they were residual pagan symbols, because the pagans loved them so much, the Europeans at one point in time turned on them with vitriol. And for centuries, they were being thrown into bonfires, symbols of the devil. They were consorts with witches and so forth. And there was this, in fact, there was this theory at one time that you could unmask a witch by attacking a cat. That if you saw a suspicious cat that you didn't know, that you would run up to it and hack off one of its ears or something, and then you would just search the village the next day to see if there was a woman without an ear, because obviously she had been the cat. So cats really had it bad for a long time, and it led to this theory that of all the animal kingdom, that cats were the most amenable to demonic possession. So what I've done, I don't believe that cats are demons, and I don't believe that they've ever been possessed by demons. I don't know that I've believed in demons, so this is more like a folklore lecture, But it led to this assumption that cats could easily be possessed by demons. That often strikes people as a little odd, but you have to realize that our conception of a demon is really a horror movie conception of a demon. What does a demon want? A demon wants to infiltrate human society any way it can in order to cause mischief and strife, right? Okay, well, humans have the first line of defense to keep demons out, which is faith. Humans have a capacity for faith that animals don't. So it was considered much easier among some demonologists to enter a human city in the guise of an animal than as a human. And it was, since cats were considered consorts with the devil anyway, of course they decided that cats would be the most amenable to possession by demons. And so cats would kind of willingly give themselves over to demons and allow the demons to enter into them, and then, work various forms of mischief. And as exotic as this all sounds to people nowadays, we have a lengthy history of demonically possessed cats, even in the United States. You can look this up. The most famous demonically possessed cat ever, look this up. You'll even find it on Google. It's not that obscure. Look up the demonic cat of the U.S. Capitol building, and you'll find all kinds of stuff. Because around the time the Civil War was ending, they started reporting this apparition in the U.S. Capitol of what they thought was a demonically possessed cat, and it was this black cat that would appear. Some people thought that the Confederacy had planted it there. And this black cat would appear and then disappear in the crypt. Originally, the Capitol building had a crypt underneath that was supposed to be for George Washington, and he was never buried there. And the cat would appear there, and over a series of nights, it would get bigger and bigger and more menacing. And I even have old newspaper drawings that I found. I found one in one of the Philadelphia newspapers, and they had an artist do a sketch of what they thought the demonically possessed cat looked like. And it was this huge, monstrous beast chasing a couple of workers down the hall. And so over a period of time, it would get bigger and bigger, and then it would disappear, and then it would be gone. And then, it's like you could exhale, but then it would start again. And they would try to link it up with national disasters. So, for instance, they would kind of keep running tabs. It's like, okay, well, this cat appeared right before this hurricane hit Galveston. It's one of the worst hurricanes in American history. It appeared right before the San Francisco earthquake. So it's like this demonic cat. It's this harbinger of doom. There was another one that they called the hex cat in Pennsylvania, and it was in the early 20th century. And on June 6th, 1906, a black cat gave birth to a litter of 6 kittens. So, obviously that's bad news, right? And eventually there was some kind of mysterious apparition that started to appear in the village. And some guy died mysteriously. The guy who owned the property that the cats were born on died mysteriously. And so the people in this town, there are all kinds of old newspaper reports about this. This isn't folklore. The cats, believe me, the cats are demons. It's folklore as far as I'm concerned, but the rest of it isn't. This is true. The people in the town got a bunch of silver, and they melted the silver into bullets, and they went out into the forest with these silver bullets to try to scare this thing away and shoot at it. I actually have a theory on that one, because they said this gigantic black cat started appearing and menacing their cattle. There is a phenomenon of black mountain lions, that have, and still, even like 5 or 6 years ago in Pennsylvania, someone reported a black mountain lion. I think maybe somehow around the same time, a black mountain lion was wandering around. They just, that's it, and they decided the demon was in it or the devil was in it, and they went out with their silver bullets and they started shooting at it. And it never returned, as most cats won't return if you shoot at them. But, they said they had scared the demon away. But anyway, the demonically possessed cats, we have a lengthy history of them here in the United States.
Yeah, it's very fascinating. As you decide to go to the next thing, so this house will be dismantled.
This weekend, yeah.
This weekend. And you said earlier off record that you weren't really sure what's next for you, where you're being drawn to. How does one segue from this? I mean, this is a very bold life that you live. It's a very big life.
I don't know the answer to your question, and that's the beauty of it for me, because I don't know. The plan right now is just to not have a plan for once. I'm in a position where I can afford to do that psychologically and financially right now. So I'm just going to go forth without a plan and see what happens. As I was telling Ruth, it's not just a Los Angeles thing, it's really a national thing. Everybody I know seems dissatisfied with whatever city they're living in, and they can't come up with any place that's better to go. So I've just decided, I've outgrown this place spiritually and psychologically, so it's time for a change. I realize I accomplished something in creating this. It doesn't mean I have to be a prisoner to it if I no longer feel it's the appropriate space for me.
Also, transmogrification is a beautiful thing.
Well, yeah, and people keep asking, it's like, how can you turn your back on something you've created? And it's like, to create something new. And there's cliche to say, but every act of creation involves an act of destruction. So I'm destroying this place, and I don't know what comes next, to answer your question, and I'm really looking forward to finding out.
It's exciting. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, leap and the net will appear. Or no net and the wings will appear. Or the scales or whatever it is.
Yeah, I guess it's just a matter of faith.
Or the sex ghost.
It's just a matter of faith, and the sex ghosts and the demonic cats will be waiting for me in the pit.
That's right. How might people find you, should they desire?
They can find me on Instagram. You can follow me there, HEXENKULT. I do have a website, empiredelamort.com, Empire of Death in French, because of course in English everything's always taken. But
It's better in French anyway.
It sounds better in French. But that website really hasn't been updated in a long time. If you're interested in the death stuff and you're interested in seeing some of the photos and getting a list of the names of sites and so forth, that's all on there. But I got to admit, I'm just not the kind of person who updates his website really ever. I get it. It was really more, that was something that was there more just to support the books. And so people would have a means to contact me about things.
And I'll put links to everything on Hey Human Podcast's website as well. This has been fascinating.
Well, thank you for coming.
I'm excited to... I have not read your books, although read
the second one's actually better.
Which one is second? Is that the
Heavenly Bodies? Heavenly Bodies. The first one was, by my accounting... They really forced me to do it in too academic a way. I'm not trying to deride my own work. It's a really bad idea to criticize your own product. I think it was just it was more academic than I would have liked it. The third one's the most beautiful because I let the pictures tell the story instead of me butting in with the text. But I really like that second book in terms of the text.
I'm excited. I'm personally fascinated by death.
Yeah.
And I know.
Then get the third one. Third one's got the pictures. By the third one, I told the publisher I'm tired of talking in the place of the pictures. Let's just let the pictures lead the way, and I'll just add some text where it needs to go.
I look forward to it. And I'm glad that Ruth told me about you, even though it was 2 days ago. I didn't have a lot of time, but it's wonderful. If Ruth is interested, I'd love to get her on air for a second.
Yeah,
come here, Ruth.
Are you cat sitting or? Are you
She found my handbag, so.
She likes.
Oh, every cat loves that handbag.
Yeah. Ruth, how long have you known Paul of his work and such?
Boy, I don't know.
Feel free to scooch into the.
Oh, okay.
Technology. Scooch into the technology.
I don't want to infringe on the princess. I honestly don't know how long we've known each other. I mean, I know that the circles that we met in, but 20 years?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe 25? I mean, time is such a bizarre construct.
Yeah.
To think of what was 20. Oh, I'm sure we met somewhere in the 90s.
Coffee Society, maybe.
Yeah. Or just the general La Luz de Jesus sort of circle, like the art gallery thing.
Yeah.
Well, in the realm of obscura, I would say Paul here is definitely at the top of the list. So what was it about your... That's a compliment, by the way. What drew you into all of this and him?
Well, she's never been here before.
I've never been to this house.
But you,
what drew me to Paul? He's dressed down right now because he's casual and he's been doing stuff. And he's just out of the shower, and it's casual Wednesday or Thursday.
I don't know what day it is.
I never know what day it is.
I don't either. But, that's a problem when you're doing business.
But Paul is a person who puts a lot of attention to detail in his outfits and his presentation, and this is I am the queen of understatement here. Paul stands out in a crowd. Paul would stand out in a crowd of the most unusual people you've ever known.
Well, you look around here. I'm not exactly a minimalist.
That's a good point.
I would never claim to be.
And we just always ran into each other in the same weird, bizarre places. And I was like, hey, that guy. And he was like, hey, that girl. And at some point we talked. And
well, that's the thing about LA. And I've said a lot of negative things about it. Obviously, I'm not satisfied with it because I'm leaving. The one thing I do love about it, and I've always loved about it, are the people.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone that you meet here it's a vortex.
Well, I wouldn't say everybody.
Not everyone. Certainly not everyone. I'll take that back. Rewind.
But there's always been here. There's something about true alternative culture in Los Angeles, or weirdo culture, whatever you want to call it, that is very welcoming and very authentic here.
Yeah. Well, the vortex is real. The vortex exists. It brought Parsons here, and for all what you'll say about him, L. Ron Hubbard, before he started the whole Scientology business, he was all about esotericism and the OTO and genuine magic. I mean, there has been this vortex of weirdness here.
Yeah. Well, in Southern California in general, for sure.
But in Pasadena, with certainly the whole Jack Parsons, that gate of hell is in Pasadena.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've heard about the gate of hell.
Yeah, there's a gate to hell in Pasadena.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Your art collection on the ceiling as well as the walls, but mostly on the ceiling.
Yeah.
What is it that there is certainly a theme here and there. Obviously there's animals and there's people and that, but what is it that draws you into these images? They remind me of... Well, if I were to stumble upon a house in the woods and walk in and there would be a mischievous magician person that owned the house, this would be its artwork.
It's eclectic for sure. This house was really intended as a manifestation of me. And so what you're seeing, really, I mean, it's convoluted and strange, and it twists and turns, and sometimes it doesn't seem to reconcile itself, but you're really seeing me psychologically. You're seeing a reflection of all these different interests that I have.
Okay.
So to me, there is cohesion.
Is there a more resonant that you see it and you think, yes, this...
No, there's no one particular painting that I'd say, oh yeah, that's just me, you know.
Interesting. This reminds me, actually, the one right here, the orange with the blue, reminds me of a piece I've actually painted.
I painted that.
You did?
That's one of the very few that I painted.
Fascinating, because I have a painting that looks very much like it. I'll show you a picture when we're done, and that's very interesting. Oh, incredible. I'm going to actually take pictures and video and post them on the Hey Human Podcast Facebook page so that people can go and look at it and see what this all is.
What we've been talking about.
You want to do.
Yeah, for sure.
It's very difficult to express what this is. And,
There was a golden time that I think has passed. You know, people ask me, like, where the hell did you get these paintings? And the answer is China. And most of them came from China because there are these painting factories in China. And you would just kind of like tell this guy, this was like maybe 12 years ago when I started decorating the ceiling like this. And I would just tell these Chinese guys, I need Doberman Pinscher dressed like Queen Elizabeth I. And they would basically say, who's Queen Elizabeth I? And you would send him a picture and he's like, okay. And, at the time, I'm not kidding, because a friend of mine, since I'm going to be disassembling this place, a friend came over and she's like, God, where the hell did you get these paintings and how much did they cost? I was like, $10 each. Real cheap. And she's like, you've got to be kidding. And I went back in my old Hotmail account that I don't even use anymore, and I pulled up the old invoices, and I was wrong because a lot of these I was getting for less, like $5 or $6. They would just paint them really fast because it was like there were literal painting factories. Like in China, you've got these factories where they do all the hotel art, okay? And so like the kind of stuff you might see at a Holiday Inn or a cheap restaurant, and that they sell at the hotel art sales. And so you'll have a guy, and his specialty is like the horizon line. He just sits there and he does the horizon line, passes it to the next guy, and the next guy does the bushes, and the next guy has like a certain sponge to do the clouds with, and they just kind of crank them along this line. And they do paintings incredibly fast, cheaper than it would cost for you to even buy the paints. And so I had been traveling in Asia a lot, and I met this guy who runs a painting factory. And so I was just telling him, it's like, hey, do you know who Goya is and his Witches' Sabbath? And he'd be like, no. It's like, okay, I'm going to send you a picture. I need Goya's Witches' Sabbath, but horizontal instead of vertical. And the horizon has to hit at exactly this level. Because see where that lamp is? Because that lamp had a green bulb in it. And I had to illuminate it so the two worked together with the green bulb. Oh, and he's like, oh, okay. And he'd be like, special order $20 or something, And they'll get you a little on the shipping, It's like, they're gonna jack up the price on the shipping and get you a little on that, but that's more than fine. You just tell them, it's like, send it unstretched. I'm gonna order 10 paintings, roll them all in a tube, and just charge me whatever you want for shipping.
Huh. There you go.
Wow.
I don't know if those painting factories are still around or what. I'm sure they are.
I'm sure they are. Absolutely.
I don't know if they're still doing work this cheap, because you got to remember, at the time, there was a time when the Chinese were deliberately devaluing the yuan. And it was a big problem in America and in Europe. They didn't like it because there was no possible way that locally we could compete with Chinese goods, because they were deliberately devaluing their own currency so that these guys were getting paid the equivalent of, like pennies per hour to crank out this stuff so that they could sell it in America for nothing.
It's like the music industry and songwriters.
I guess, yeah. But anyway, so that's why I don't know, even if you found the painting workshops, I don't know that you're getting these paintings for $6 anymore.
Sure. It's fascinating. I really encourage everyone listening to go to the Facebook page for Hey Human Podcast, because it's going to blow your mind when you see all this stuff. It's really something. Paul, thank you for your time,
of course,
and for bringing me into your home. And Ruth, thank you for the introduction.
My pleasure. I'm glad that it all came together, because I didn't realize how quickly, how close to the end we were.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful that
I didn't. It's not like I would tell anybody publicly that I'm tearing my house apart at this time. I mean, just even the idea that I has caused me to get emails from people all over the country saying,
Can I have your yak head?
Yeah, it's like, I'll pay shipping for such and such. It's like, no,
or what you said, turn it into a museum. Because you see something like this, and the idea that it's all coming apart is, from your point of view, of course it's all coming apart. It all came together. It has to all come apart. But somebody who's seeing it and appreciating it and doesn't have the capacity to put it all together is thinking, this is a tragedy.
Yeah, there's another aspect which no one considers, which is they all say, like, but you've created a work of art. How can you tear it apart? because you don't have to live in it.
I have a lot of things as well. I have a very unusual home, but I can't hold a candle to this. I don't have taxidermy heads hanging off chains from the ceiling that bump into your head when you walk under them.
We're very tall, however.
Well, I am pretty tall.
Yeah,
but
the mandalas, right? Those are made to be destroyed. When I went,
that's right. Mandalas are made to be created, to be experienced, and then to be cast to the wind.
That's right. When I went and did the body painting, 10.5 hours I stood while an artist, Cheryl Ann, painted me from head to toe, in and out, so to speak, and it was I say extraordinary a lot, but it really was. It was an extraordinary experience. It took 10.5 hours, as I said, and in the end, I had to wash it away. I looked in the mirror and I thought, this is what I actually look like. It was beautiful and colorful and astounding to behold. And I had to get in a shower and wash it all away in 10 minutes, 10.5 hours to put it on.
But letting go.
Yes.
And I'm letting go.
And that's a beautiful thing.
You're not afraid of death.
That's right.
It's also, no, I am afraid of death. I'm not afraid to walk forward in spite of that. Letting go is really an important lesson to learn.
Yes. It's very hard to receive new things if your hands are full with old things.
That's true, too.
That's true.
Yeah. Paul, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Rate and review Hey Human on iTunes. Beware of demonic cats and sex ghosts, unless you're into that kind of thing. Bye.